Inshallah, we'll continue in the topic of Alamat al-Sa'ah, or the signs before the Day of Judgment. And I remember the last point we stopped at was when we talked about al-Malhama, which is a huge war that is expected to happen between the Muslims on one side and mainly Western and Christian armies, Rum, Ben al-Asfar, as it was referred to, they were referred to in the Ahadith. This is one of the Alamat al-Sa'ah, but it is still Alamat al-Sa'ah Sughra. And there's Alamat al-Sa'ah al-Kubra, there's major signs of Day of Judgment. The major signs are the signs that happen just before Day of Judgment. Alamat al-Sa'ah al-Sughra, this might be the last one of them, and the biggest one of them. After which, there will come Dajjal, there will come Isa ibn Maryam and Dajjal, and then Ya'juj and Ma'juj, and then other big signs. Khuruj al-Shams min Maghribiha, the sun rising from the west. And as I mentioned before, we have a few ahadith that tell us things in order, how they happen in order. And I mentioned the hadith of Gordon Sitten Bayna Yadi Sa'a, and the sixth one of them was ثم هدنة تكون بينكم وبين بني الأصفر ثم يغدرون بكم فيأتونكم في 80 غاية تحت كل غاية 12,000. The Malhama, just this war was the sixth one. So when is this war going to happen? Is it close? Or are there other signs before this war that have not happened yet, which will indicate to us that this war is not imminent? It seems that this war is not imminent, and whatever we're seeing is just part of the continuous crusades that started from the dawn of Islam. There have been crusade after crusade after crusade, and these have not stopped. And they're just bouts. They come in bouts, but in between them there have been continuous fighting. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he says, ثالث نضحة أو نضحتان ثم يفتحها الله عز وجل وأما الروم فذات قرون كلما هلك قرن جاءكم قرن. He says, Persia, the Persian Empire, only one or two hits and it will be conquered. نضحة أو نضحتان ثم يفتحها الله عز وجل وَأَمَّا الرُّومُ فَذَاتُ قُرُونٍ. But the Romans, and that represents all the Western countries now, and the Christian faith. He says that Qurun, he says they are generations and generations. It's not like the Persian Empire was conquered immediately in the time of Umar ibn Khattab. But the Roman Empire, Prophet ﷺ indicated in this hadith that it will be a continuous and constant and repeated battle. كلما هلك قرن جاءكم قرن. Whenever one generation and one crusade finishes, another one will come to you. Subhanallah. And this is what has happened according to what the Prophet ﷺ has told us. وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Not only that, he says in there's another hadith in Sahabi, his name is Mustawrid al-Fihri. He says to Amr ibn al-As, تقوم الساعة والروم أكثر الناس. قال أبصر ما تقول. قال ما أقول إلا ما سمعت من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. تقوم الساعة والروم أكثر الناس. He says, at the end of this life, most of the population of this world will be Romans, will be Western people, European, Anglo-Saxon. All these refer to the same race. But they will represent most of the people living on earth near the Day of Judgment. And then Abu al-As says, أما إن قلت ذلك فإن فيهم لخصالا أربعا إنهم أسرع الناس كرة بعد فرة وإنهم أحلب الناس عند مصيبة وأحسن الناس لمسكين وفقير وضعيف ورابعة حسنة جميلة وأمنعه من ظلم الملوك. Amr ibn al-As when he heard Mustawrid al-Fil, he is stating that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the Romans and the Europeans will represent most of the population of Earth near the Day of Judgment. He says, I find that they have certain good qualities that may qualify them to, prosper and multiply and become so populous. And he mentioned 4 qualities, such as that whenever they are defeated, they come back very quickly, and whenever there is some kind of disaster or calamity, they have patience and they can withstand it. And you actually notice this very clearly. Look at if someone dies in a Middle Eastern family, for instance, or in our communities, look at what you hear, people yelling and crying and screaming. You rarely see something like this in these communities, right? And even big disasters, a plane falling or something happening, a few days and then they're back to their normal life again. Subhanallah. He says, وَأَحْلَمُ النَّاسِ عِنْدَ مُصِيبًا. He says, وَأَحْسَنُ النَّاسِ لِضَعِيفٍ وَمِسْكِينٍ لِضَعِيفٍ وَفَقِيرٍ وَمِسْكِينٍ. He says, and they're kind to the weak and the poor and the sick. And that is something that you see as well these days, that they have all these organizations that take care of the people who are underprivileged or weak or needy, right? And we see this very clearly. And they take taxes from people who work to give it to people who don't work. All these kind of things. And then he says, وَرَبِعَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ جَمِيلًا. He says, and one of the best, one of their qualities, وَأَمْنَعْهُمْ مِنْ ظُلْمِ الْمُلُوكِ. He says that they are very resistant to injustice from their kings and their rulers. You can see that in the Western communities, that it is not easy for a ruler or someone who's a high level to become unjust, because he would immediately be exposed, immediately be impeached or tried. You saw what happened with this the guy in Chicago mayor, when he was just talking on the phone and saying some nonsense on the phone. Immediately this was recorded and he was taken off. We see this all the time, but in our communities we don't see that. These are qualities the Sahaba noticed in the Europeans or in the Westerns. And they said this might be the cause why they are so strong and populous at the end of this life. So another indication that these events are not imminent is that Prophet ﷺ mentioned that at that time فسطاط المسلمين يومئذ بالغوطة إلى جانب مدينة يقال لها دمشق من خير مدائن الشام. He says that main or the capital or the stronghold of the Muslims at that time is in a place called Al-Ghouta, and this place Al-Ghouta is just outside of Dimashq, and I heard maybe it is actually now included in a suburb of Damascus in Syria. He says the stronghold of the Muslims will be in that place at the time of this big war. So now this is not the main stronghold of the Muslims. As we see, actually, the Muslims do not have a stronghold at all, because they are so much separated in different small countries. But it appears that at that time of this Malhama, that the Muslims will be somewhat united, and they will have a stronghold just outside of Dimashq or Damascus. Right? Also, Prophet ﷺ mentioned another hadith which gives us things in order. He says, عمران بيت المقدس خراب يثرب وخراب يثرب خروج الملحمة وخروج الملحمة فتح القسطنطينية وفتح القسطنطينية خروج الدجال. This hadith tells us everything in order. He says عمران بيت المقدس. Bayt al-Maqdis, as I mentioned before, is Sham in general, Palestine, Syria, Jordan, this area. عمرانها means that it will become the stronghold of the Muslims. Muslims will be centered around this area at that time. And he says, خراب يثرب. At that time, people will not be centered around Medina. Medina of the Prophet ﷺ will actually be deserted. Will be deserted or almost deserted at that time. And the stronghold of the Muslims will be around Dimashq and around Palestine at that time. And Prophet ﷺ mentioned in many ahadith that the people of Medina will leave Medina at its best state. يعني بمعنى تتركون المدينة في أحسن أحوالها. The people will leave Medina, although Medina at that time will be a good place to live in. But for some reason, nobody knows why, people will be deserting Medina, Hudayf ibn Yaman mentioned in one hadith that he asked the Prophet ﷺ about everything that is going to happen till the day of judgment. But he says, I forgot to ask him when he told me about people deserting Medina, why will they be deserting Medina? He did not ask the Prophet ﷺ, why would people desert Medina? So Medina will be almost deserted, and people will be heading towards Dimashq and Syria and Palestine and Jordan, living in these areas. Actually, when this volcano was happening next to Medina, almost happening volcano next to Medina, Jabal al-Rais, people might know, heard about this about 2 months ago. A lot of people of Medina actually, or the villages around Medina were leaving because they were afraid that the volcano will erupt. Because this volcano erupted one time before, in the 600s after Hijrah, at the time of Imam Nawawi. And he described it in all detail. He described how much fire was coming out and the lava was going, and it was just melting trees and melting houses and everything, and people were running away. This volcano is actually very close to Medina, but I'm just saying this is an example where Medina was very populated by people, and something simply happens and people start deserting it. So at that time, Kharabu, Umran Bayt al-Maqdis, Kharabu Yathrib. And then he says, Kharabu Yathrib Khuruj al-Malhama. And at the time when Medina will be deserted and people will be heading towards Asham, that is when Al-Malhama will come. Have we seen this happen yet? We have not seen this happen yet. So we can tell for sure that before Al-Malhama will come, Medina will be almost deserted and the stronghold of Muslims will be in Asham. And then he says, وَخُرُوجُ الْمَلْحَمَةِ فَتْحُ الْقِسْطَنْطِينِيَّةِ. And then after Al-Malhama, after this big war, Muslims will head to a city called Constantinople. They translated Constantinople. This is actually in Turkey. This city is in Turkey. It was conquered by Muslims before by a leader called Muhammad al-Fatih. But it appears that this place will become again a stronghold, not for the Muslims at the time of after Malhama. It will not be controlled by Muslims. And actually, if you see today, Turkey in general is not controlled by Islam. It's not governed by Islam. Yes, most of the people are Muslims, but most of the people are also don't have anything to do with Islam. If you go to Turkey, you will find that most of the population does not even practice. They're just Muslims by name. But it appears that this city of Constantinople will be not in the hands of Muslims at the time. It will have to be conquered again. Prophet ﷺ was asked before, أي المدينتين تفتح أولا؟ روما أم القسطنطينية؟ فقال مدينة هرقل تفتح أولا. مدينة هرقل هي القسطنطينية. So after the conquering of Constantinople, there will be a conquering of Roma. Roma, that's in Italy. And all these are events that have not happened as yet and are still to happen in the future. Shall I finish this? So what I'm trying to do in this khutbah is put things in order so that you know what will happen before what, so as to know if the events are soon or not soon. Right? And Kharabu Yathrib Khuruj al-Malhama Fath al-Qistantiniya. So Fath al-Qistantiniya will happen after that. And then immediately after conquering Constantinople, and the way Constantinople will be conquered will not be with any fighting. Prophet ﷺ قال للصحابة سمعت بمدينة جانب منها في البر وجانب منها في البحر قالوا نعم يا رسول الله قال لا تقوم الساعة حتى يغزوها 70,000 من بني إسحاق فإذا جاءوها نزلوا فلم يقاتلوا بسلاح ولم يرموا بسهم قالوا لا إله إلا الله والله أكبر فيسكر أحد جانبيها فيقولون لا إله إلا الله والله أكبر فيسكر جانبه الآخر فيفتح لهم فيفرج لهم فيدخلونها. This city of Constantinople will be conquered by Muslims, but these Muslims who will conquer it will actually be of a European descent, min Bani Ishaq. They will be Muslim converts. They converted, and they are 70,000 of the European Muslims. They will be the ones to conquer Constantinople, and they will conquer it without any fighting. Prophet ﷺ described that when they surround the Medina, the city, they will say takbir in a very loud voice, La ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar, and the people of the city, when they hear this, they will just surrender. Half of it will surrender with the first takbir, then 1/3 with the first takbir, then 1/3 with the second, then 1/3 with the third, and then they just peacefully leave the city for the Muslims. So this is how this city will be conquered. And then immediately after conquering Constantinople, as they are resting, and they have Prophet ﷺ وَقَدْ عَلَّقُوا سيوفهم بأغصان الزيتون فيصيح فيهم الشيطان إن الدجال قد خلقكم في أهلكم. After that, immediately Dajjal will come. As they are resting, Dajjal will come, and when Dajjal comes, immediately at the same time, Isa ibn Maryam will come down. Isa ibn Maryam, Prophet ﷺ described, فَيَنْزِلُ عند المنارة البيضاء شرقي دمشق. Also, Isa ibn Maryam, when he comes down, he will come also down in Dimashq. And at minaret, Manara, it's a tall place where they make adhan. He says, Manara بيضاء شرقي دمشق. And people who have been there, and I've seen pictures, mention that the Jami' al-Amawi in Dimashq, the Umawi mosque in Dimashq, the menorah is actually white. I saw the color, it's actually white stones, big white stones. It's not painted in white, but the stones themselves are white to a little bit of maybe grey. So that is where Isa ibn Maryam would come down. Of course, Prophet ﷺ, when he mentioned that, was there Masjid Amawi at the time? Actually, Dimashq was not even in the hands of Muslims at all at the time. Dimashq and Syria was not in the hands of Muslims at the time when the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that Isa ibn Maryam would come down at Manara, the place of Adhan, minaret. He will come down at the Manara that is in the eastern part of Dimashq. Subhanallah. And now you find the Manara indicating that when he says that, it indicates that Dimashq will be a Muslim land, right? And it will indicate that a masjid will be built there, and that the minaret will be white, and that is all just as he described, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not only that, actually, there's a very interesting thing. He mentioned when the Dajjal comes to Medina, of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he looks and he says, "Liman hada al-qasr al-abyad?" He says, "This white castle, who does it belong to?" And then he say to him, "This is the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam." Subhanallah, at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his masjid was made out of tree trunks, palm tree trunks, and the roof was made out of sa'at al-nakhil. Also the leaves, they brought the leaves and they put pieces of wood like this and they laid the leaves on top of that. But he says when the Dajjal comes, it will not look like this. He says the Dajjal will look at Medina and he will see a big bright white castle. Have you seen the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ? It's so bright and it looks like a white castle, so big, and everything is made out of rukham. What is rukham in English? Marble. White marble. You've seen that. Everything, even the floor is white. Everything, the walls are white. And the lights are so strong that everything is like shining, right? So he says, who belongs to this white castle? And then they tell him this is the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. All these are ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ at the time when people were building with just wood and tree trunks. Also, when the Dajjal comes, his army, Dajjal is Jewish by origin. He's Jewish in origin. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him certain powers as a fitna, a trial for the people. He will get certain powers. No time to talk about it today. But his followers will be 70,000. يَتْبَعُهُ سَبْعُونَ أَلْفًا مِنْ يَهُودِ أَصْفَهَانَ. 70,000 Jewish army will be following Dajjal, and their origin is from Asfahan. Asfahan is a city in Iran. You might be surprised, but Iran has a lot of Jewish population. You know that? Iran has a lot of Jewish population, and عليهم الطيالسة. And they wear certain kind of, it's almost like a prayer, like our prayer rug, they wear it on their shoulders. I've seen pictures of this as well on the internet. They still wear these things, their rabbis especially. The famous hadith that you hear about a war between Muslims and Jews, لا تقوم الساعة حتى يقاتل المسلمون اليهود فيختبئ اليهودي خلف الحجر والشجر فيقول الحجر والشجر يا مسلم يا عبد الله هذا يهودي من خلفك تعال فاقتله. This famous hadith, people use it a lot to indicate the liberation of Palestine. No, this is not right. Because liberation of Palestine will happen before this hadith occurs. Liberation of Palestine will happen way before this. فُسْطَاطُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ يَوْمَئِذٍ بِالشَّامِ. Before Malhama, before this big war I mentioned, Muslims will already be strong in this area. This hadith of this fight, these are the people who come with Dajjal. The hadith of Prophet ﷺ indicates that Dajjal will be defeated. And his followers, these 70,000 people, are these 70,000 people who will be hiding behind the trees and the rocks. And that is when a miracle will happen, and the trees and the rocks, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make them speak and show them the face of these people who are hiding behind them. So you have to know that this hadith should not be used just for talking about the liberation of the current problem and occupation of Palestine. This hadith happens after Dajjal, when Dajjal comes and surrounds. And when he says surrounds Al-Madinah, doesn't mean the Medina of the Prophet ﷺ, it actually means Dimashq itself. He will come and surround Dimashq. And that is where Isa ibn Maryam will come out. And when he sees Isa ibn Maryam, فَيَذُوبُ كَمَا يَذُوبُ الْمِلْحُ فِي الْمَاءِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make Dajjal so weak, although he had all these powers before that. Once he sees Isa ibn Maryam, he starts melting, just like salt would melt in water. If you put some salt in water, how much it will melt immediately? قال فأتباعه عيسى بن مريم فأطعنه بحربته فيريهم دمه في حربته. He starts melting, but still Isa ibn Maryam goes and kills him with a spear. Kills him with a spear. And then his followers are the ones whom this hadith applies to. So it's important to know the order of these events. And then I'll mention a last hadith in this khutbah. طبعا الحديث I just mentioned فيسلط الله المسلمين عليه فيقتلون ويقتلون الدجال ويقتلون شيعته حتى ان اليهودي لا يختبئ خلف الشجر والحجر فيقول الحجر والشجر هذا يهودي خلف تعالى قتله. The last hadith is hadith of Ibn Hiwala. Ibn Hiwala, Prophet ﷺ said to him, إذا رأيت الخلافة نزلت الأرض المقدسة فقد دنت الزلازل والبلابل والأمور العظام والساعة يومئذ أقرب إلى الناس من يد هذه من رأسه. Prophet ﷺ said to Ibn Hiwala, and he put his hand just over his head. He said to him, when you see the Khilafah, so this indicates that there will be Khilafah. Muslims will be united and they will have a stronghold in Ash-Sham. He says, when you see that happening and the Khilafah of the Muslims becomes in Ash-Sham, the capital of the Khilafah of the Muslims become in Ash-Sham, that is when everything has come close. Al-Balabil wal-Zalazil, meaning the big events, Al-Malhama, Qital al-Yahud, all these things, Al-Dajjal, Ya'juj wa Ma'juj, all these things are coming immediately after that. And he says, وَالْأُمُورَ الْعِظَامِ, he says, وَالسَّاعَةُ يَوْمَئِذٍ أَقْرَبُ إِلَى النَّاسِ مِنْ يَدِ هَذِهِ مِنْ رَأْسِهِ. He says, and the day of judgment at that time is closer to the people than my hand to your head. And he had put his hand just on top of his head. So these are the events that will happen just before, and these are the biggest signs, minor signs. Inshallah, we can talk after that about the many small minor signs that we see in our daily life, minor signs of Day of Judgment that the Prophet ﷺ has talked about.